Okay, look at that. We're under control. I'm having about my four. Nah, that exaggerates. About my second, maybe my third attempt at a video interview with American composer Joseph Koykkar. Am I pronouncing your name okay? I should do more
Pretty
car.
darn close. If you just say Koykkar, Koykkar.
Koykkar. So the accent is there. Thank you, Joe.
I noticed you meant a little more of a Koykkar, but it's just Koykkar.
Yeah, it's me. I've had an impediment since I was 12. What can I say?
Uh, we'll go over it.
Anyway, we're going to he is in Madison, Wisconsin, which I must say I've never been to, but it looks like an absolutely gorgeous, except for the weather, because I live in Southern California. Beautiful, beautiful city. Really gorgeous
Yeah, it's a
place.
great town. That's why we've been here for 30 years.
Yeah.
Good place, yeah.
And we're going to be talking about Joe's Ravello CD, double takes and triple plays. It was released in 2016, and as I've been giving him a rough time about, but it's a very serious rough time. You know, I'm reviewing all kinds of CDs, all kinds of music. I love all of it. I'm so intrigued. I'm the right guy for this kind of thing. I love it. But what I can say about double takes and triple plays, as I've told you, Joe, this is a giant dance fest. And I'm going to try to get to the bottom, as I've threatened you, of this energy. And of course, you were involved with the dance department at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and as composer and so on, writing music for them. And so, of course, that's a natural thing. Dance requires rhythm and pulse and energy. But you've been hinting that there's much more here, and I want to know because this music is joyous, beginning to end, in about 12 takes anyway on here.
Sure. Well, you know, when I look at it, Dan, my feeling is this music. I have the CD.
Sure.
I'll just go and look at it. Yeah, as I mentioned in the liner notes, when you look at the two kind of tributaries that would make up my musical river, if we can use that as a metaphor, it's because I grew up playing rock, blues music, that American music that was in my world. And I started that with the Beatles in 1964, meaning that a lot of people where I lived in the east side of Milwaukee, you know, we formed bands, and I think that as a base of that the Beatles music captured the world because there was a positive energy and joy there. But that's also true with the music of the Baroque, like I think I mentioned to you last time, Brandenburg concertos, et cetera, et cetera. And that's always been part of it because I want to capture the whole range of human experience, which means the real positive ecstasy down to the real, you know, darker sides of the psyche and existence. So for me, that was always something I had to do, and it just so happened that I took a job doing music in dance as opposed to doing the world I was doing before, which was theory comp. You know how it is. And
I don't. I hate it. I don't know about how it is. I hated it. I hated theory and composition. Hated it. Sorry. Go ahead. You gave me a nightmare for a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, that's what most professional composers who are working in a university environment do. You know, they're teaching theory composition, which is fine and all that. But when I was in my 20s, the two things that I like to do in collaboration, because I always was interested in collaboration, was I like to work with choreographers, you know, because I played for dance classes, et cetera, and I enjoyed improvising. So I like to work with those folks, and also like to work with filmmakers. So a chunk of my world is working with film and video. So when the theory comp world was made perhaps a little less than interesting at the time,
You're so diplomatic.
I could have gone to a film department as well. But anyway, it so happened that a stroke of fate happened that I ended up doing this music and dance. But as I mentioned, within a year or so, that really changed gears, and some colleagues of mine in computer art, et cetera, we all put together, based on a concept I had called Interarts and Technology, a major that was based around computer technology. And we're talking 89, 90. We're talking a long time
Way back, yeah.
Yeah, and we had students who were into computer video and of course electronic computer music and also dance, and we were doing all this multimedia, and that went on for roughly 18 years plus here at Madison. So, therefore, what I'm getting at is the music for dance, as far as composing for choreographers, that really took a back seat, oh, heck, probably since the mid 1990s. So, in other words, the bottom line is I'd be writing this kind of music whether I was teaching, ear training 101 or doing whatever, because it's really me.
Okay, and that leads me, of course, to this question not only of the organization of the CD, but now you can help me be a little clearer also. The repertoire on this CD, wonderful stuff, all of it. I mean, I love the saxophone quartet piece, and on and on and on. There's just, let me do an editorial for you, okay, Joe? Which is that there is such a wealth of incredible music in all kinds of different instrumentations, all joyous, rhythmic, pulsing, accessible, something musicians should be running to pick up. So we'll see what happens. We'll see. But just some incredible repertoire. But what I was going to say is it covers about 20 years. You think? I think 1999 to 2012 or something. I read somewhere. That's
if we look at officially, we'll make it official. The oldest piece comes from about 1992. That is Triple Play, which I did for a friend of mine who also was on the piano faculty here. And Triple Play used a MIDI disc clavier keyboard. We had that on stage, and then we had a typical grand, that was keyboard number 2, and then I had a sampler on stage, which I had tuned to eighth tones. So it... a Bosendorfer. So that was the first piece on the CD, and I thought, this is.
It's fun. It's fun. It's not only is it just plain fun, it's just plain damn good.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. It's just a wonderful, entertaining piece. It's fabulous. Yeah. So in fact that is the earliest piece on the CD.
That's the earliest. The latest one would be the commission for the pianist Jerry Astolfi, which is Streets and Bridges for solo piano.
You know what? While we're there, let's talk. We might as well talk about some of these pieces. I've listened to these 3. I loved every bit of it. For example, Downer Avenue. There's not even a downer there. In other words, your music is just so full of energy. Downer Avenue, Lafayette Place, Brady Street. Tell me this history. By the way, these piano pieces are marvelous, really marvelous.
Thank you.
Tell me about them.
Well, it's interesting because they're really in my world, in my consciousness right now, because they were just performed as part of a tour that Jerry Astolfi did of Wisconsin about a week and a half ago. So I actually was in Milwaukee, and I went back to the old streets that I grew up on.
Well, I was looking in the wrong town. Yeah. I actually brought up the map. I was looking at Madison. I was trying to find it because I knew there was obviously a real life connection. So these are streets in Milwaukee.
Yeah, the east side of Milwaukee, right? And that's where I grew up and cut my teeth. And and then I moved on and moved around the country, so to speak. But so the commission was for composers from Wisconsin, and they had to have in their new works some link to Wisconsin. So therefore, for me, my link to Wisconsin was to think about my childhood in the kind of the urban area of Milwaukee, and I thought, streets and bridges, and therefore I thought of particular locations in the city that meant something to me in my youth and my teen years, and that's the nature of the beast.
And it's a beauty. And by the way, you just brought me a flood of memories of streets and bridges in my little hometown of Spokane, Washington. As a kid, certain images, I think of a bridge immediately that I remember for some crazy reason when I was 10 or 11. Anyway, let's see. Now, you mentioned a lot of improvisation and playing by ear. You say I do a lot of improvisation and playing by ear. It's tantamount to heresy for some people. On the other hand, I'm reviewing all kinds of stuff, and especially young people in their 30s. You know what I mean? Really, in the midst of their careers, improvisation is for classical pianists, for classical fiddle players, for all of them, it's a given now. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm really glad.
So what was I going to say? So I'm assuming that that's part of that description of being a dance department pianist when you were there. You sit down, you play, you improvise, you keep the rhythm going, that kind of thing. And what was the gist of my point? I don't know. How do you use improvisation, if at all, in these? These seem pretty written down, double takes and triple plays.
That's right. When people ask me what kind of music I write, I hate to say things like contemporary classical because it sounds like such an oxymoron. People say new music, all these things. So I like to tell them, well, what I do is written out music.
What?
Because written out music, it's written out.
Written. What a cop-out. What a cop-out. Go ahead.
No, but that's what it's all about, because it's not contemporary classical, I can hit that. But anyway, it's written out. And because so much of the music I've been involved with as a youngster was basically playing by ear, listening to something on a record and figuring it out and improvising. You know what I'm talking about, the whole popular music world, from blues, jazz, rock and roll, everything of that world. But as I got to be 17 or 18, I decided, well, do I want to just keep writing songs like this, 16 measure or so songs, which I really enjoyed, and I loved all that stuff. But, I love writing popular songs. But then I thought, okay, I was about 18. I decided, let's broaden the horizon, and that's when I really went back. I had some classical training as a real youngster, and I really went back full steam, obsessively, into classical music and jazz. So I went to Mozart, I went to Coltrane, went to Stu Gallagher, Stravinsky, and I did that for an apprenticeship for over 10 years through a number of degrees and really had a great time. Okay? But so what I'm getting at is with that discipline and that training, suddenly this idea of improvised songs became these much more detailed, written out compositions in that tradition. So I was the writer, I get performers, they play it. I followed that whole thing. And
okay. Well, thank you for making that connection, because there is a connection you've made that I think answered my question, kind of, sort of, which is that improvisation from your youth, and who you were then, became useful and helpful in terms of improvising, but writing it down for these pieces, for example. And the other thing is, I came from exactly the opposite. So I was one of the freaks, I do believe, although you're younger than I am. But I was thoroughly, totally classicist. Pardon me, that was not a dog barking. That was a car roaring by. But I was like thoroughly, totally spoiled brat classicist from like age 12. There was nothing else was of any use or interest whatsoever for me. I fought it tooth and nail. I fought the Beatles tooth and nail. Now I'm an old man and I'm mellowing and I'm enjoying this and I'm even reviewing jazz. I never thought in my life. And I'm seeing all this kind of free music. In other words, you guys have the right idea. I was wrong.
Well, yeah, it was just a generation. It hit us at the right time. We're talking about, us, meaning young musical types who were, probably right now we're 60s to early 70s. And music really meant something to that whole generation back then. As we all know, that was the voice. That's what led to the Bob Dylans and the Rolling Stones. It changed everything rather than just being kind of a music for teens, the Pat Boone era type of thing. Yeah, and most of that, again, what I'm getting at was, play by ear. Most of the people I knew at that time couldn't read. And, some were very good players, but they had to listen to it, and then they had to figure it out, and then they learned how to improvise over the chords, etc. And some of them went off later into jazz, and I happened to go more into the concert, that tradition, because it turned me on more rather than...
And was there anything before? I came from a family that I don't know, kind of sang. My brother sang in Glee Club or something. Nothing big. So I often wonder how come. Where I do have an idea. We don't need to go there, but how come I became a classical person? And I'm just wondering if there's any sort of in your head anything way back that somehow was triggered later that became this obsession with classical music.
Well,
so-called.
Again, when I was really young, I did play, classical piano to some degree, and got a piano when I was, maybe 11 years old. So I think I had an affinity for the little bit, I hate to say deeper, but let's say it, there's a little deeper level in that kind of music. And then as one gets older, and in my case I'm talking 16, 17, but if you listen to some of the music of the groups that were out, that was pretty deep and serious stuff. But anyway, it's hard for me to know a subconscious kind of epiphany. I'd read some articles, I read a book by this American composer David Amram, and I thought, oh, that's kind of cool what he's into, and he's kind of a jazz guy, and he's all this stuff, and yet he's classically trained. And I thought, well, this sounds great. This sounds like something I would really enjoy doing, rather than doing just the rock scene.
So none of this none of this conversation we're having is in any way judgmental. In my view, there's nothing judgmental being discussed here. But as wonderful the English choral director that I spoke to, of course I've completely forgotten his name now, but a couple nights ago said essentially, nothing replaces good music. I mean, the good music is there and gives its rewards. So you know what I'm trying to say? In other words, having good musical experiences, learning good music.
Right, and that's what I loved about. And again, I think it's reflective in my CD and my whole work is I'm trying to mine. We use that term, American culture, my society, and meaning. AM radio, everything. I'm trying to mine that world. I'm not looking at just the exclusivity of saying, well, I'm just going to worry about, I don't know, we could say Darmstadt or whatever. And then, some other folks probably really think that's great. But I'm looking at the American culture, my world, my background, and I just take that, and instead of just writing a 3-minute pop song, I thought, well, isn't this great? We could write long works and make them into symphonic structures. I was just very fascinated by that, and that's what just turned me on. And of course, the colors of the sounds, rather than just 3 guitars and a drummer. I thought, I like all these instruments, and I don't think there's a what should we say a value that I think everything can be good. In other words, it's just genres. There's great blues music, and there are times when you want to hear a great symphonic piece. There are times when you want to hear a great jazz improvisation, and that's what I love. That's what makes living today, in the last 50 years, easily so wonderful. Yeah. There are no more of these barriers, and I think I see that in the young people, that I know, and it's a very different world than that stratification that was around probably in the 50s, where you were a legit musician and if you played. I thought, man, forget it. That's old stuff.
Okay, so I wore white tie, I wore the tailcoat, I did the whole thing. I was an SOB stuck-up person about my art, my precious art, classical music. It's all done. I'm okay, everybody. I've recovered fully. In that, as I've told other people, then we're going to kind of get back to the CD, get back on subject a little bit more. But this is a big subject that actually covers who you are and how you compose. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, right. It was that kind of those two springboards that really made me write. And even when I did my first piece and conducted it back in '76, I wrote the liner notes, or what's called program notes for this concert. And I felt that the serious as well as the popular music of the time, that was the fertile ground that I was dealing with. And I was 24, so I mean, this has always been where my head's been at.
Yeah. And by the way, we are. I'm Ned Rorem. I had a brief encounter with, and he it only takes a few things from that man's mouth to set you up forever. But he was adamant that we are Americans. It sounds chauvinistic or something, but he didn't mean it that. It was just that we are Americans. We have an innate understanding of our culture as Americans, and we have a rich, huge, gigantic cultural feast to feed upon and be inspired by, of just simple things, rhythms,
right.
Jazz, all that, let alone history and so on and so forth. So that's exactly right. And your music is American in its optimism. I mean,
good.
That's who we are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like I think we talked about a little bit. I've been around this field for 40 years plus, and I attend conferences, festivals, and I often think, well, okay, these are well-crafted pieces. Not, I'm talking about just generically, but I always think a lot of times composers, they get so focused on being serious and profound. It's almost like a one-dimensionality, I suppose, of emotional expression, and they forget that Beethoven, boy, that music is almost ecstatic at times. You think
Yeah.
of Pastoral's Symphony and all these works, and I feel we can't just be brooding our life away, because life isn't that. I mean, life is the ups and downs, and that's the human experience. And of course, this is related to musical language, and that's probably why the music of Reich and folks like that really created a public, because suddenly there was a music that was considered serious, not just popular music, and yet it because it was using major triads and had a pulse and all these things, suddenly people felt there was a positive emotion as opposed to the darker, you know what I'm speaking about, on just a technical level. So anyway, I try to just cover that whole range, and I'm glad, because
And tell me, I'm moving on here. Tell me, it just occurred to me, because I'm about to ask you to tell me all about Todd Welburn.
Oh.
And the reason is not only that is he a fantastic pianist, but are you good enough? Are you a good enough pianist to play what you write? You know what I mean? I mean, it's meant to be an amusing question. And I would expect you to say no or yes.
I think I could play most of it if the caveat or whatever would be if I practiced. And I don't really do that much anymore. I mean, I'm okay. I can get around, and but when it
I don't believe a word. I don't believe a word of it, because that piano repertoire on double takes and triple plays is not only scintillating, exciting, positive, and all the good stuff we've been talking about since the very beginning, but let's see, how shall I put it? Well, challenging. I mean, that's a good way of putting it. This is not easy stuff. This is quite complicated pianistics. So bravo for starters. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up playing keyboards and all this, so I mean, I'm an improviser. I can sit at the piano. Somehow something happens subconsciously. The ideas come out. I hear them in my head. I get them on my fingers. It's a very hard to articulate process. So I can get through that if I would shed probably most of it, but Downer Avenue would have a few tough licks, and there are some that, it's like anything else. Yeah, he could play his own music, but there are people could play it much better. All they do is practice the piano 4 hours a day for 30 years.
There you go. And the mistake is entirely mine. I have no idea why I set you up like that. I know there was something something about a wink in your eye. So tell me about Todd Welburn, because he's a fabulous pianist.
Oh, I'm so glad you're mentioning him, because Todd was a personal friend. He was on the faculty here at UW-Madison. He specialized in contemporary music for the piano, and then he got into even doing some of the more, should we say, unique repertoire for the piano, like he played that Charles Dodge piece. If you don't know about it, check it out.
I better. I'm supposed to be on top of this stuff.
Charles Dodge, the computer music person. It was a piece based on Caruso. So Caruso singing one of the arias from Pagliacci, and it all goes through all this computer processing, but it also has piano. So Todd did a lot of those things, and then he got very fascinated with some of the minimalist work of Reich and other folks. He was just an adventurous guy, so we became friends when I moved to Madison, and I would write pieces for him like Triple Play. And what else did I do? I think the keyboard dances, the 2 piano pieces.
Interfacing for piano?
Well, this was called Keyboard Dances. It's on there, right?
It's on there, sure. Let me have it.
Yeah, he did the premiere of that.
Yeah, there we go.
And then I did interfacing in '97. So we took the idea of the disc clavier of the Yamaha Grand using MIDI, and we used that. We used a Kurzweil sampler. I loaded all these sounds. He would play it live, and it would trigger these samplers. Therefore, as an interfacing idea, and that whole piece, it starts out kind of like Western music, piano and vibes and mallets, and then it's gradually moving till you get to the last movement. It's like an Indonesian gamelan sounds, and there's no piano anymore, because he's plucking the strings inside, and we did a little trick where he can play a note and it sounds like the note is being bent. but it's done through MIDI. It's a MIDI trick.
This describes your expertise, yeah?
Yeah, so people would say,
what you were doing there.
How can he make a note go like bang, bang, and he's playing the piano, but that's because we had a note that had that vibrato triggered at the same time he played grand piano. So
it's so fascinating. It's like learning to sail or learning to fly. It's so fascinating. I want to do it. Could never do the math. I would never be able to do the math.
So Todd, he retired a few years back, and we had a good relationship, and we'd go around the country, and you'd play these works and try to troubleshoot them a lot of times.
Because nobody else could play them, right? Nobody else.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole idea is talking about the technology. Oh, boy, life using technology live, you never know what you're going to get into. Yeah. But you know how it is, just like when we were doing our FaceTime Skype work. It's hang on.
Let's not go there, okay? You're going to bring back bad juju.
Yeah, well, we got over that. Let's see.
So we did. Now, what about, is it Relâche Ensemble of Chicago?
Relâche, Relâche Ensemble. They're a very fine new music group based in Philadelphia for almost 40 years.
Really? Wow. Way ahead of the time.
Yeah, they go way back to the late 1970s in Philadelphia. They've played all around the country, a number of CDs. They primarily find themselves linked to what, I guess people in the Village Voice and academia call downtown music, as opposed to uptown music. Does that ring a bell for you, Dan?
No, I'm a West Coaster. That's all. It's all totally Manhattan. But I do get you too.
New York, they would, but back in the 80s, I don't know, it's kind of crazy, but people would refer to that music that was Cage related or the Minimalist or whomever as downtown, and the music that was coming out of Lincoln Center in Columbia, which was more serial music based, they called that uptown. Wow. So anyway, Relâche likes to look at the more downtown music, but yet they're all, top-notch players. They're all virtuoso players, and it's not that they're doing, whatever, conceptual music. But anyway, so they were open to doing the kind of work I was, and I was contacted by their director back in the mid-90s. I guess my first CD, which was produced in 92, they liked it, and they wanted to do piece X. And then they said, oh, gee, we just lost our string players or something. So they wanted to know what else I had, and I gave them a double take. So they started to play that a lot, and they had a mission in 2001 of the piece called Panache, because I thought, okay, if you're calling yourself Relâche, which means closed in French, as kind of a joke, it goes back to, Cateau or that whole world of kind of French.
Yep, with all its subtext about closed.
Yeah, so they would. Anyway, I wrote the piece for them in 2001, and they played a lot, and they played double take a lot, and I got them to record it, and those are the two chamber music highlights on the CD, I think.
Thank you. You just covered what I was going to ask you about. What is this Chicago Saxophone Quartet? In other words, the ensembles on this CD are absolutely first class, and the Chicago Saxophone Quartet is, of course, virtuoso, but your piece, Inside Out, is just a hoot and a half. It's just marvelous. It's like ear-to-ear smile. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with the ensemble and with this piece.
Okay, well, let's see. The ensemble, I was on a new music festival at Ball State University, which is Terre Haute, Indiana. And the fellow that was directing it, he said, I played some of your music in Chicago in the mid-1980s. And he was perhaps the chair of the music department, I can't remember. And I said, you did? And he said, yeah, you had played part of New Music Chicago in the mid-80s, this piece called Continuum. And I said, well, that's great, Paul. And he said, yeah, I play alto sax. And then he was telling me he had this saxophone quartet made up of really professional people, and they were going to do a tour of Taiwan, and would I have the drive to write a piece rather quickly so it could be premiered in Taiwan that August. So this must have been in the spring or something. So I said, sure. And so
yeah, no problem. Sure, no problem.
I'll lock myself in a room. I don't know. But anyway, so that's what happened. So I met this fellow whom I actually he had played some of my music, and he had this group, the Chicago Saxophone Quartet, and they were going to go to Taiwan in August 2009, and so that's how that happened. And yeah, I thought, okay, we're not going to have a magnum opus because it has to be done, 2 short movements with conflicting materials. And I like to think of, for me, materials meaning scales, pitches, things like that, and it'll generate ideas. And so the first movement has a certain sound, and the second movement has a different sound, kind of based on scales that have a relationship to augmented triads. So you can hear there's a slight difference. So that's really how all that came out.
Wait a minute. Let me make sure the tape recorder's on. Yeah, it was on for that. In other words, what you just gave us, all of us who are going to, I hope, watch this interview, was the most beautiful, brilliant documentary on how a composer thinks and organizes and creates. So thank you very much. That was just a beauty.
I'm glad I did that for you.
No tips, but well, maybe we'll see. Who knows what will come through? Come on. Let's see. Anything I've forgotten about? I'm looking at. The keyboard dances for 2 pianos. Holy mo, Uncle Jack. That's just like rhythm, pulse, tonalism, full of fun and fury. Those are my notes. And by the way, fun and fury, fun, happy, joyous. That's what I see all the way up my notes.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Because sometimes I do go in the darker world. It's like if we look back at the music of anyone in the pantheon of composition, right? If we listen to that music, I don't care if it's a Jupiter Symphony of Mozart, a Bach fugue, you'll see that there's that wonderful trip, that trajectory of human emotion. In other words, there might be a few phrases that are very positive, and then suddenly, because of the pitches, chords, etc., it'll take that dip into melancholy, then it'll pull out. And
if only briefly. Yeah. So therefore, I stand corrected. Perhaps there are moments. I'm just trying to remember. So you're not just happy-go-lucky. You'd have a nervous breakdown. There have to be.
Right. For me, it's just like life, and that's what's so great about instrumental music and getting away from popular songs, where you basically just do 3 minutes and it's a focus, and great, everybody gets it. And that's why I was attracted and broke out of that world, and to explore these other dimensions back on, I suppose, I was 18 years old. And, again, the idea of the written out music, so I could cover that. And my wish, of course, would be that more people around the world would really be interested in this, especially the music of our living composers. That, I think, is the biggest, crisis dilemma facing all of us in the music world, is how can we get people to really, listen and enjoy and that tradition.
Well, part of me thinks things are getting better because I see a much broader, bigger, huge landscape of stuff these days. But I can tell you, I have come into these various CDs by yourself and others not having a clue, and being richly rewarded. So I suppose it's part of maybe what I'm trying to do. I mean, my small way is just you gotta, just keep. We all have to just keep putting it out. Right. But I think. Again, not to. I'm possibly some people are saying, why is he being so positive about this guy? But what I'm saying is that whole CD is a great pleasure to listen to. Yes, you know what I'm saying? It's just a great pleasure. People will enjoy that CD.
I mean, I get pleasures, I'm sure. People who love, let's call it classical music or jazz, you have to get something from the music, even if it's very, very sad and dark. You're getting some kind of pleasure emotionally to keep listening to if you want to spend your life in something.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what I think we're getting at. There's a pleasure in that whole emotional range, and perhaps these pieces on here. They may be lean. I don't know. I'd have to look at them in detail, but there's maybe a leaning towards more of the positive side of the emotional world. But that's good.
Yes, it's good, and not only that, that's exactly what this CD is. It's an upper. Okay. It's a big fat dance party, as I said earlier. It's a joy, and remember, I'm listening to CDs, all types and all kinds. I mean, all kinds of stuff. But to have one come into my purview that just dances, that's special. So, okay, we are done. We better be done. Have just had a wonderful, finally, interview with American composer Joseph Koykkar. How'd I do? Oh, okay, great. His Ravello.
By the way, people are wondering where's that name from. Well, it's Americanized Finnish.
Interesting.
So that's why it has that double K.
So what was it? How would it have been pronounced in Finnish?
In Finnish, I've heard some different things, but the most obvious one I hear from my family tree is it'd be Koykkari. So it'd be Koykkari.
And the horror is Ellis Island and other places. My last name was Kepl, mit umlauten und doppelpays and the L and the E and 7 or 8 letters. And somebody there, some guy who wanted to get home for lunch, just said, "Oh, Kepl. Okay, Kepl.
Pronounce that.
Get out of here." Anyway.
It's the same kind of thing, Dan.
It's almost like being branded, but in a good way. That's a bad illusion, but somehow I'm branded. I'm Kepl. Some guy in Ellis Island changed my life forever. Okay, we are done. We've double takes and triple plays. I want to make sure all of this, our interview, the links, everything, videos, the whole stuff is going to go up at performingartsreview.net, and I'll put out the e-blast and the whole thing. So let's see if we can wake some people up. Saxophone quartet players, pay attention. Duo piano ensembles, pay attention. Pianists who want some really, really interesting, entertaining, wonderful repertoire to add to their, pay attention. Let alone instrumental ensembles. I'm thinking of Panache. By the way, you're a great orchestrator. Just wonderful. When things just work. Okay.
You have a background in obviously working with ensembles yourself for quite a length of time.
Yeah.
So you know that field. Yeah, I love it. I mean, when I was younger too, I did a certain amount of orchestral conducting training. So I think that all that helped.
When the orchestration is right. That's what I meant. The way you orchestrate, the way you color things is.
I think and I think that's good. And I always feel that maybe today the younger composers, because they're involved so much with MIDI and sampling, they might not have that original experience. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, I hadn't thought of it before.
Horns and all that stuff with MIDI samples, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for those of us who came up before that and we learned orchestration kind of just by making sure it worked in reality, and it probably does something to the inner ear, I would guess. And so I was glad I had that experience for a few years in my 20s, and
Although you're sounding terribly, terribly old. I'm thinking of how many people write anymore in script. You know what I mean? Take a pen and actually write anymore. Nah, doesn't happen anymore. Yeah, no, I'm joking. Of course, you're looking extremely well and happy. How do I get out of this thing? I guess by ending the conversation. We are done. Thanks, Joseph Koykkar, for giving me some time in the late evening. Your daughter was here for dinner, apparently. It was there in Madison, so thanks for giving me some time.
Well, that's wonderful, Dan.
We'll see you. Bye.
Take care. Okay, bye now.